Kamisato Ayaka can deal a lot of damage in the right setup, so this video will showcase 5 most popular teams you can build based on the latest Abyss usage data. So let's start with a team that's probably considered to be one of the easiest to play in the current meta, which has Kazuha, Kokomi, and either Shenhe or Rosaria as teammates. The reason I say it's easy to play is, well, because Kokomi's Hydra application is so good here. You can achieve perfect rotations with little practice, not to mention the fact you're also getting healed, while someone like Shenhe or Rosaria either provide damage buffing for Ayaka or act as an additional sub-damage dealer. And obviously, to tie everything together, the Maple Samurai Boy is here to group the enemies, lower their resistance, and boost crowd damage. One additional reason why I like this team a lot is that normally, when you add a Hydro teammate like Mona, you really need to make sure she gets a lot of energy recharge, just so you can maintain the freeze and omen buff. However, with Kokomi, you actually don't need to bother building energy recharge on her at all, since you rely on her Hydro application from the skill, and in fact, in an example team comp I have here with Shenhe, you can see the energy recharge values I chose to go for while also ignoring Kokomi's ER, and this allows me to focus on one less thing I need to worry about. Now when looking at equipment, Ayaka uses Blizzard Share unless she has Jade Cutter, which I'll show an example build later, while Shenhe or Rosaria can be built in a really similar way by just giving them a Noblesse Forset and Favonius Lance to help reduce team's overall energy needs, and at this point, it's become a standard to build Kokomi together with Thrilling Tales and Tenacity Forset if you want to maximize Ayaka's burst damage, while for Kazuha, it's the usual Viridescent Forset and either Favonius or Sacrificial Sword, but in my case, I just like to give him Iron Sting until someday I can get my hands on Freedom Sworn. And the way I like to start off my rotations, assuming everyone besides Kokomi is able to cast their burst, would be by first opening up with Ayaka's dash and applying cryo to an enemy, then switch to Kazuha, tap his skill and use the burst, go to Shenhe or Rosaria, use their skill then burst, switch to Kokomi for her jellyfish skill, and then finally get back to Miss Kamisato and dash, normal attack once if she has Miss Splitter, use her skill, and activate the burst. I mean, there's always room left for freestyling here. Like for example, holding down Kazuha's skill can be a better choice if you're going up against enemies that are spread out, like in Abyss 12-1 with Nobushi Samurais. Just keep in mind the cooldown will be longer before you can cast it again and reapply the resistance shred. But if you want to see just how high Ayaka's burst number can go up, well, there's a team I call Hyper Ayaka, which is made up of Shenhe, Mona, and Kazuha. The only difference here from previously mentioned equipment choices would be Mona's, and as I pointed out before, you really want to get at least 190% to 220% energy recharge on her, equip either Noblesse or Tenacity Forset and Thrilling Tales Catalyst, although I have seen some great showcases where Mona uses Prototype Amber instead to help out with her energy needs, as well as provide a little bit of healing for the team. Now in my showcase, you'll notice that Shenhe doesn't have a Noblesse Forset, and it's Mona who's using it now, since believe it or not, even after spending so much time in this game, I am still like everyone else who doesn't have that many good artifacts, so I just went with a double 2 set of attack and an energy recharge on her to have the burst ready off cooldown. The rotation here is pretty much the same as previous one, except when it's time to use Mona, always make sure to first cast her burst and then skill afterwards in order to maintain a more consistent freeze on your enemies, since her Hydra application isn't so great when compared to Kokomi's. But yeah, with this team you can see some absolutely insane numbers, although that's really Shenhe's Icy Cold is doing the majority of work, and it quickly drops down to a more realistic number. I personally like this team only when going up against a couple of targets, and then it works exceptionally well because otherwise, without any healing or just relying on Prototype Amber can be a bit problematic, especially if you go up against enemies with corrosion or heavy hitters. So this is why I say Kokomi's team is more cozy and easy to use, while with Mona, you deal more damage, but you'll also have next to none survivability. One last thing to mention is that sometimes when using Kazuha's plunge from the skill, you'll shatter the enemies and this might mess up the freeze setup, so if you notice this is causing problems to your rotations, just avoid plunging and wait for him to descend on the ground. Still, I think it's about time I show you a free-to-play friendly variation of Freeze, because believe it or not, you don't need to have all these fancy 5-star characters and weapons just to see Ayaka do big damage numbers. Now this team here is made up of Xingqiu, Sucrose, and either Rosaria or Kaya. Just like before, Ayaka uses Blizzard Stare, but I equipped on her fully refined Amenoma Kageuchi, which reduces her energy needs by quite a lot, and I could even have less ER than shown here, and still maintain her burst active at all times thanks to Amenoma. Now for the other Cryo Buddy and Xingqiu, you need to decide which one should have a Noblesse Forset equipped on them, because if in this case I put it on Rosaria, Xingqiu can just use a regular sub-damage dealer set like attack and hydro damage, or a full emblem emblem set. Finally, Sucrose, just like any other animal unit, needs to have a Viridescent Venereer, and I'd also recommend equipping on her Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers. However, the tricky part here is that I haven't really found a rotation in which you can effectively buff Ayaka with it. See, the thing is, normally Thrilling Tales is put on a Hydro Catalyst like Mona, Kokumi, or Barbara, and all of them are usually there to start freeze reactions, and then you immediately switch to Ayaka and get the buff from the catalyst. But in this case, an effective rotation I found that kinda works for me would be by first opening up with Ayaka's dash to apply Cryo, use Sucrose's burst and skill to shred the enemy's resistance, switch to Rosaria, who now gains the Thrilling Tales buff, and use her skill and burst to deal increased damage to enemies with lowered resistance, and then go to Xingqiu to activate his burst and skill, and finally go back to Ayaka, who should now only have a Noblesse Forced buff and the enemy's resistance is reduced by Sucrose. If it's not ideal for you, then you could otherwise start the rotation with Rosaria's skill and burst, switch to Xingqiu then to Sucrose, and then finally to Ayaka, or alternatively, you could also leave Xingqiu as the last teammate you switch to, so in that case it would be Rosaria, Sucrose, Ayaka, and Xingqiu, but this will be really hard to pull off when Ayaka's burst is already casted and the enemies are not frozen yet. Another idea I had would be by switching out Favonius' weapon on your Cryo buddy to a more offensive option, so at least when someone like Rosaria gets Thrilling Tales buff, the burst will deal way more damage. I mean, to be honest, you're also not going to be grouping enemies that effectively with Sucrose, so it's not like you're gonna have an easy to follow rotation, since there's going to be some chaos in your fights. Which is why this next team is all about control, with the good old Venti acting as the backbone for the composition. You've probably heard of Morgana team comp at some point, where Ganyu, Diona, Mona, and Venti are used together, but here, using Ayaka instead of the Coco Goat is the focus of this showcase. And again, Blizzard's Rare and any of the recommended swords works for the Kamisato girl, while Diona usually is best used with either Sacrificial or Favonius bow to help with cryo energy generation as well as a Noblesse Forced. And as for Mona, either Tenacity or Emblem Forced as well as the Thrilling Tales are optimal choices. And finally for Venti, you already know the drill. Viridescent Forced is just too good to pass up, and for his weapon, it's either Favonius, Stringless, or Elegy for the end. There's a lot of room left for building the team's stats, since if you can reach these energy recharge stats on each of them, I can, for example, just focus more on Diona's healing, and equip on her Sans, Goblet, and Circlet with health main stat, while with Venti, he can cause a lot of damage by just increasing his elemental mastery as much as possible. Also, you can switch out Diona with Ganyu for even more damage, but this also means you'll need to obtain more energy recharge for Ayaka. Now there are some things you need to be aware of, like the fact Ayaka's skill and burst can sometimes miss the enemies who are sucked into Venti's vortex, so finding the right composition will take some time to learn, and more importantly, this team comp works best against Abyss Chambers, where you are able to crowd control the enemies. And also, before you finish up the room, if you see that Venti or Mona do not have their bursts ready, spend a few seconds obtaining energy for their bursts, because you really want to start the next room fully charged up. You can be a bit more easygoing on Ayaka's burst, since rotations usually start with Diona, and she can obtain a nice amount of crowd particles before you get to the Kamisato's burst. Speaking of which, the rotation I use right now starts off with Diona's skill and burst, then Venti's skill and burst, before immediately switching back to Mona's burst and then skill, and finally, do a dash with Ayaka for the passive to kick in, normal attack once if you have Mist-Splitter, and use skill and burst. One important thing I want to mention here is that if you do use this team against chambers with many enemies, keep in mind you're probably going to get more energy particles from them, which means energy recharge requirements can go down by quite a lot, and you can sometimes even get away with having only 190% ER on Mona, and she's still able to cast her burst when you start a second rotation. But this team is definitely a bit harder to pilot than with someone like Kazuha, who keeps the enemies on the ground frozen, so make sure you position Ayaka in the right place when the enemies are held up by the vortex in the air. Now, you're not gonna believe it, but this next team isn't actually Freeze. That's right, even though Melt isn't ideal for Ayaka, she is actually really good in Mono Cryo. Obviously, this team became popular thanks to Shenhe, but I would say that the one who actually matters the most is an Anemo character, and the best one at this job is, with no surprise, Kazuha. Now, the nice thing about Mono Cryo is that 3 of your units are, well, from Cryo, so there's gonna be plenty of particles flying around, and this means you need to worry less about energy recharge and focus more on the damage. Also, since using Blizzard Sphere without Freeze means you're losing out on 20% additional critical rate, this is the perfect time to show you how Jade Cutter, with the mixed 2 set on Ayaka, works as an awesome solution. You can take a look at her stats and artifacts I'm showing you right now, but the big takeaway here is that I'm still getting 15% critical rate from Cryo Resonance, so if here she has 68% crit, it's actually 83% with the Resonance bonus, which is more than enough, and could even be lower, so you could focus on more critical damage or attack. What's also interesting is that Shenhe can act here more as a support damage damage dealer, so I gave her a Blizzard Sphere 4 set, which, yes, provides less critical rate than usual due to no freeze being present, but at the same time, she still benefits from this set a lot, and I could even equip her with an attack substat weapon. But for this showcase, I still went with Favonius Lance, Attack Sands, Cryo Goblet, and Attack Circlet. As for the third member, I want to keep the team alive, so naturally, Diona was the best choice for me with Sacrificial Bow and Noblesse 4 set, while Kazuha has the same equipment as usual. I honestly really like this team a lot. Jade Cutter is putting in a lot of work here, and since I don't need to rely on freeze, the rotations are usually less strict. Just make sure Icy Quills from Shenhe are kept active as soon as they are available, although keep in mind without freeze, you're not going to keep enemies in one place, which means Ayaka's burst will be less effective. Also, one last thing to mention would be that as an alternative, you can go for something like Rosaria, Kaya, and Jean if you do not have either Shenhe or Kazuha, but it's really more of a mix and match situation to see what works best for you. I could keep going on and on about different team variations, but I hope you got at least some kind of an idea how to build her. I know that I barely talked about her normal attacks and rotations, which honestly, I feel like as long as you do N1C or N2C, it's good enough, but most of the time, I focus on just refreshing other teammates' skills and buffs, so I only squeeze in a couple of normal attacks here and there. Also, you may be wondering about her big bro Kamisato. I mean, they're fine together, you can definitely use them, but from my past experience, the team becomes focused more on Ayato with an Ayaka, which, don't get me wrong, it's a strong enough team to clear the abyss. Speaking of which, I know that I only focused on freeze and Mono Cryo, but that's really where Ayaka excels at. Her burst is extremely hard to land without keeping the enemies in one place. It can often go off in a different direction, and in something like Melt, things like ICD won't even let it cause melt reactions effectively. But otherwise, I think she's one of the best units in the game right now. Well, at least one of the best heavy hitters. And I hope this video was useful or entertaining to you, because I had a lot of fun showcasing all of these teams to you. Anyway, I hope you're subscribed to my channel, and I'd appreciate if you could press the like button. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.